Oh, I've got a presentation.
Oh, fantastic. Let's go. So, if you wouldn't mind, give a brief introduction about yourself, and let's move right along to 1930s Philadelphia. Let's go.
Hello. I am Justin Klugh, a writer for Baseball Prospectus. I've written for Fangraphs, SB Nation, The Good Phight, The Athletic, The Inquirer, back when they were called Philly.com. These days, These days, I'm on a few Phillies podcasts for The Good Phight, one of which is The Dirty Inning, which I co-host with Dr. Trevor Strunk. It is a twice-a-month, exhaustively researched hour and a half of Phillies storytelling that showcases typically one particularly awful, funny, forgotten, or obscure inning in Phillies history. And today, for this live audience, I'm going to present to you a story about Phillies pitcher Hal Kelleher and the dumbest inning of all time. Please forgive my rudimentary PowerPoint skills in constructing this. Now, I assume, knowing the audience I'm speaking to, that at least some of you are familiar with Hal Kelleher, as he was at one point the author of the worst inning in National League history. And I thought, what better inning than that to discuss for our first ever live episode? So welcome to this. Hal is not to be confused with Hal Kelleher of the Washington Senators. Just to get that straight, Kelleher. Kelleher was born in Philadelphia in 1914. He grew into a tall, slim man, and many years later was buried in New Jersey in a tall, slim box. Historians typically agree that his career with the Phillies occurred prior to his death, from 1935 to 1938. So here we are in 1930s Philadelphia. They say that Kelleher was picked off the sandlots of Wentz Olney in the northeastern part of the city. From a young age, he was said to be cool as a clam, never flustered. This was stated about him once after a day in which he had stranded 15 men on base, including 3 bases-loaded jams that he had managed to worm his way out of. And if you've ever interacted with a lot of Philadelphians on the internet, you're probably aware of how calm, lucid, and rational we all are. So this totally tracks. Thanks to some intense map reading, we can confidently say that Hal was in this general direction when the scouts found him pitching in the sandlots. Already working out with the Phillies as a young player in Florida, Kelleher received a deal in 1935 to play for the Hazleton Mountaineers in the New York Penn League, who had a working relationship with the Phillies. The Phillies player manager at the time was Jimmy Wilson, who was once described as peppery by the media. Wilson and Kelleher's relationship would be pivotal to the young man's career, but before he got to Philadelphia, Kelleher got to know a little town called Hazleton. Have you ever been to a Pennsylvania coal mining town? It's the kind of place that has to put its own name on the town sign twice, as though they actually prepared for you to say, "We're where?" after reading the town's name the first time. There is, of course, a cold and brutal reality for towns like Hazleton that dot the map all over northern and central Pennsylvania. This was once a true industrial paradise in which grown men would go to work deep in the earth with a non-zero chance of being crushed to death, and even non-zero chance of breathing in the fumes that would inevitably kill them. But they went to their deaths untimely or right on time, knowing their contributed daily labor had gone toward the strengthening of an unbreakable American industry. Here's one of Hazleton's local boys who made good. Joe Maddon is, this is from a story in the Chicago Tribune where he is graciously lavished as a baseball man, an innovative thinker, a unique character, pretty much any story you've ever read about Joe Maddon. In this story, he goes up to a bar and orders a shot and a beer and refers to that as Hazleton style. But I don't think the writer of the article, who was just absolutely tickled by this, realizes how common an order that is, especially in small towns like Hazleton. So yeah, that was an interesting little tidbit for me. Here's Hal again. He may have had his eyes closed for this picture, but everyone could see at the time that he had the stuff to pitch in the big leagues by 1935. In fact, he was so good he was about to receive the most important and awful lesson baseball offers. You can fail, even when you do everything right. And you can fail the next time you do everything right, too, because baseball owes you nothing. He debuted for the Phillies on September 17th against the Reds and threw a complete game shutout. And in 3 starts that season, he had allowed 5 earned runs in his first 25 big league innings pitched. A sparkling trio of ultimately meaningless starts that kept Kelleher's reputation pretty high. On September 29th in Hazleton, he pitched like a demon and seemed to be on his way to a shutout. But for the third straight game, his work was spoiled by some late scoring. According to the Hazleton Standard speaker, if any pitcher in the New York Penn League has reason to go and sit someplace and have a good ball to himself, it should be Hal Kelleher of the Mountaineers. Kelleher continued to pitch for Hazleton in 1934 and 1935. In one game, he gave up a huge home run that cleared the left field fence, the first homer to do so at Cranberry Park that season in Hazleton, according to the newspaper. Just a quick aside on Cranberry Park. I think this is a hand-drawn image of it. I had to identify it from a map on Wikimedia. I don't know if that thing there on the right is a baseball. It was the closest thing to a baseball stadium I could find on the map, and the way it's positioned. They talk about the mining equipment that was in the view of the outfield when you were sitting in the stands. So I thought that structure there could have been that as well. So this is from 1884, this hand-drawn image. And in January 2016, Hazleton Standard speaker writer Ron Marchetti wrote that Cranberry Park once, quote, meant as much to the Hazleton area as Yankee Stadium meant to New York and Ebbets Field meant to Brooklyn. And sadly, at this point, at the time of that writing, the park's outfield was a 4-lane highway and the infield was some industrial parking lots. Cranberry Park once had a visit from Babe Ruth in October 1923. Ruth, in a batting practice expo, hit what is considered the longest home run in park history to straightaway center. He went hitless in the actual game he was there to play. He struck out facing a local miner to the delight of everyone watching. And then they ended the game early anyway, before his last at bat, so he could sign more autographs. And then there were a lot of requests because they had closed all the schools and coal mines so that everybody could come down to the Cranberry and watch Babe sock a few dingers. Cranberry was where Kelleher pitched during the 1934 to 1935 seasons, but with the Phillies couldn't have been happier to have him available to them going into 1936. As I said, he had a productive and supportive relationship with Jimmy Wilson that, in a better, more famous player's career, would probably be viewed as the guidance that molded his natural talent into major league skill. But in the case of Kelleher, it only made it seem like that was about to happen. Wilson said Kelleher was the best rookie he'd seen since Dizzy Dean, and on the same level as names like Bucky Walters, Joe Bowman, and Orville Jorgens. Yes, the Orville Jorgens. So Kelleher jumps once more from small-town Hazleton to big city Philly at 22 years old. He was groomed for the number 2 spot in Wilson's rotation in Philadelphia, a huge feat given that he was in high school 2 years prior. Now he was part of what was supposed to be the best Phillies rotation since 1915, over 20 years. He, and this is quoting a UP Wire story, he may be the vital link in determining the success of the Phillies this year. A March 20th recap of another game stated that he looked great, and he was referred to in one gamer as a shining light for the Phillies. But one problem was that he was prone to wild streaks, called wobbly a bit times, where he couldn't get the ball in the zone. And then at this particular time, he managed to strain his back and hurt his arm. So that also hurt his chances. Initially, him being on the team was viewed as a success story, that the young Kelleher had been acquired on the cheap and looked to be worth so much more. But then the injury made him, quote, even less of a bargain than is customary at the Baker Bowl, said a particularly fork-tongued writer in the Hazleton Plain Speaker. By mid-season, our pal Hal Kelleher had appeared in 8 games. The Phillies had lost 7 of them. This is a picture of the Dodgers ruining opening day that year. And on July 9th, he got released to Baltimore. He would return to the Phillies in September, but on August 28th, he was sent home from Baltimore for getting into a fight on a train to Syracuse with his manager. It's an age-old rite of passage for any adult, fighting your boss on a train. Apparently, Kelleher had a real knack for getting into scraps with Baltimore's manager. This particular time was because the manager had yelled at Kelleher for talking too much on the train, and Kelleher had yelled back at him in defiance. And if you're one of the few people to not have fought your boss on a train, I feel like I can offer you a piece of advice here. If your boss's name is Guy Sturdy, there are definitely other weaker people you could probably be fighting, but in Kelleher's case, it was too late. He and his manager, whose name was Guy Sturdy, were locked in a brawl going 70 miles an hour. This is a picture of Guy Sturdy. Look at this guy. Look at his bemused, menacing stare. The slightest hint of a smile, like he just spotted you hiding behind some other kids during gym class dodgeball. He wants to be in a fight with you today, and he's been dead for almost 60 years. In 1939, he received a 90-day suspension for physically assaulting an umpire who blew a call at the plate. It's the kind of thing that could get you kicked out of baseball forever today, but of course it didn't back then. In fact, Sturdy was still managing in 1947 when he was fired from his job as a minor league manager for swiping the hat off an umpire's head, having to be escorted off the field by a cop, and then fighting the cop, all in front of 2,000 witnesses. He was thrown in jail and had to appear in front of a municipal judge. Again, this is the most likely type of person with whom you will get in a fight, but the least likely person to whom you will win that fight, as Kelleher learned that afternoon on a train to Syracuse. He left that altercation with a directive to go home and heal his throwing hand, which had, of course, been injured in the scrap. Kelleher got a lot of attention at training camp in 1937 until he injured his hand on March 20th. He was also asked to show up at a hearing in a Clearwater, Florida hotel that had been called by Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis on the matter of the fight with Guy Sturdy, but not the fight Kelleher had with Guy Sturdy, a different one in which Sturdy had been attacked by a colleague at a Knights of Columbus meeting, according to an Associated Press story. Kelleher was called to the hearing, as were several other coaches, the entire Baltimore Orioles team, and the man who had attacked Sturdy. I'm sure it was a productive and emotional gathering for all. In 1938, for some reason, expectations were high, sixth place high, but it was not a kind year for Kelleher. He had an ERA over 9 most of the time, and after daring to step on a train with his manager and 11 other Phillies fringe players to go down early for spring training, he made 6 appearances during the regular season. That's right, this year the Phillies had a slew of pitchers who were going to boost them all the way up to 6th place in the division, and Kelleher was one of them, along with Claude Passeau, Wayne LeMaster. It was noted that the Phillies had a lot of local boys, including Jimmy Wilson, Bucky Walters, Elmer Swede Burkhart, and of course Kelleher. But as is typically the case, the presence of multiple Philadelphians in one place did nothing to raise morale. The prospects of the Philadelphia Phillies cannot be called bright, wrote one newspaper from most years in history. The Phils may be 1 or 2 games better or 1 or 2 games worse, read another. Exciting times. And indeed, the Phillies did lose and win games as the 1938 season started. Mostly they lost them. They dropped 10 of their first 11 and were outscored 88-47 in the month of April. May was a little kinder, as their longest losing streak was only 3 games. But on May 5th, they suffered probably their most humiliating loss of the season and the only one in which they allowed over 20 runs, and 12 of them belonged to Hal Kelleher. The Phillies were already down 9-1 in the 8th inning of their game on May 5th. This one was over. Wayne LeMaster had gotten the start, thrown 3 pitches, broken or popped or snapped something important in his arm, and left the game immediately. Tommy Rice entered the game and started issuing walks indiscriminately into the crowd. And then Pete Savess replaced him after 5 hitters and replicated his strategy of trying to walk his way out of a bases-loaded jam. It was a bold move that did not work. Since Jimmy Wilson could see where this one was headed, he left his pitcher out there to soak up the toxic runoff this game was producing, and by the 8th inning, the Cubs were again up 9-1. Wilson yanked his pitcher out of there so he could go cry in the shower and dropped our boy Hal Kelleher right into the final frame of this mess. And somehow, that's when things went really, really wrong. So let's now go through this inning itself, hit by hit, just to relive this utter disaster. Single. Walk, single, RBI ground out, single, walk, double, single, single, walk, single, strikeout, single, triple, single, and finally a foul pop for the 3rd out. 12 runs in 1 inning off 1 pitcher. It was a National League record. 16 hitters, 10 hits, 3 walks. The Phillies lost 21-2. They had 6 hits all day, and Hal Kelleher never pitched in the majors again. Most news recaps just kind of skipped over his appearance in the game since it had been well out of hand before Kelleher had even entered it. The press was used to implosions like this for the Phillies. This would be the first of 5 straight 100-loss seasons in Philadelphia, and their 6th in 7 years. Reporters seemed to typically mention that Kelleher just sort of appeared in the game at some point, and then maybe an hour later it ended. Larry Shank called it a nightmare inning in his book Phight and Phils, but that was honestly the strongest wording I could find about it out there, despite how historically bad it was. Later that month, Kelleher was released to the minors for being, quote, of no help to us, according to Phillies president Jerry Nugent on May 27th. We jump ahead now to 1945. Hal Kelleher is a cop walking the streets of Philadelphia, but also an ace for hire. Sometimes the minor league Trenton Packers would call him because they'd need a ringer against a particularly troublesome foe, and Kelleher always delivered, according to the Lancaster New Era. He threw a no-hitter for the Packers that year, striking out 13 batsmen. He'd thrown one in 1944, too. He'd actually thrown one in September 1943 as well, but for Lansdale of the Lehigh Valley League, according to the Hazleton Standard Speaker. He was so good that people started to see what Jimmy Wilson had seen all those years ago, and they told him that he could probably go back to the big leagues if he'd wanted. Perhaps he had the repeated blows struck against him that May, but in 1938, when he told them he'd just rather be a police officer. And so we close the door on another sad little inning in Phillies history. Who are we to judge a man just for being the worst ever at a thing he does? We can respect him and his story by finding a lesson in his shame. And I felt that lesson was, if you absolutely have to fight your boss on a train, for the love of God, try not to use your pitching hand. Thank you.
Well, that was fantastic, Justin. Thank you very much. If I may direct someone's attention there's actually a SABR Games project written about this game, this 21-2 drubbing. And it says that Kelleher faced Billy Herman to open up what became a disastrous inning. The Cubs sent 16 batters to the plate, scoring 12 runs on 10 hits, only 2 of which were for extra bases. The Cubs' lead ballooned to 20 runs after the offensive bombardment. I think the SABR bio, or the SABR Games project author, Matt Albertson, did a really bad job of explaining how bad that was. And Justin did it a lot better for me. So thank you very much for making it interesting.
Not a problem. If you sat there and watched that inning, it would not be anywhere near as interesting as we can typically make this stuff decades later, I'm sure.
Yeah, that was fantastic use of a presentation too, to show exactly where the hits lined up and how bad it ended up being. So does anybody have any questions for Justin about this particular game, the podcast, anything? Go ahead, Stephen.
Hey, I had a question about the artwork. Can you tell me something behind that?
Which artwork was?
The artwork at the beginning and at the end of your presentation.
Oh, for the Dirty Inning logo.
Yes.
Yes. Go ahead. Just like who made it, or
yeah, who made it? You know, like it's very interesting. It's very interesting artwork. I was just wondering, just a little, what can you tell me about that? And so, was it yours, or did you have to go to somebody to put that together?
I went to an artist on Twitter. His name is Payne Prophet. I had known him never in person, but I had seen his work. He does a lot of old baseball stuff. He does a lot of soccer. I honestly, we had him do the logos for every one of the podcasts we do. So it's like the same style for everyone you see from this collection of podcasts. I'll put his Twitter handle in the chat, just because he does great work. And I'm always like, can I give you money for this? And he's like, no. So he has a personal account here, and then I think he does the same. It's the same account, but with an underscore for his work and his business stuff. But yeah, he's a great artist. He's incredible, and we got lucky meeting him and having him do that work.
Hey, Justin.
Hey,
Hey, first of all, great presentation. I'm definitely going to check out your podcast.
that's awesome. Thank you.
Sounds like there's a lot of fun. What's amazing is how many singles there were in that inning, and no home runs. Triple's the biggest hit, and it doesn't sound like they covered it. That it was no big deal in the press, because I was wondering if Keller had any reaction after the game. Just being left in the game that long. But it doesn't seem like there was any interview with him or anything. Is that right?
Yeah, like I said, I felt like the general impression I got was that almost stories had all been filed by the time he came into the game, because it was just so out of hand. And I would have wanted, he would have been the first person I'd go up and talk to in that situation. Like, hey man, this game was really bad. And how do you give him some softball, like, oh, how do you recover from it? How do you bounce back from the, but yeah, they didn't really see, I don't think they really felt like he had much to say after that, considering it was already being viewed as his last go in the major leagues, and then was his last go in the major league.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have gotten a personal reaction from him, though.
Right.
That would have been interesting.
Well, that was really great. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you.
Obviously, you had a Crash Davis to guide him, but is 12 runs in an inning still the record?
I was afraid someone was going to ask me that, because I forgot to find that out. So I kept saying, oh, it was the record at the time. I think it wound up getting beaten, and I feel like I think it was like pretty close to now, like maybe in like 2015 or something. Like there was some kind of disastrous inning that I think did outpace it. So to answer it with as vague information as I have, I think it has been beaten since 1938.
Two quick questions, Paul Amber here. One is, the podcast, is that audio only? And then secondly, what was my second question? Oh, do you know of any other cities that have a similar theme there? They say, okay, the dirty inning for the Boston Red Sox or something like that. Thank you.
Man, if there are, I am not aware of them. And honestly, we use the formula as like sometimes we'll center it around an inning, but to be honest, a lot of them it winds up just being a jumping off point for just really storytelling. So like even in the past year, one of the biggest impetus was, unfortunately, the dying of Hall of Fame players. So we did an episode based on Tom Seaver and his numbers against the Phillies and how good he was against the Phillies. And like Dick Allen, we did a Dick Allen episode centered on his 529-foot home run out of Connie Mack. So but as far as other teams doing them, I mean, I think that would be worthwhile. I am not aware of anyone else, not to sound like too patting myself on the back, but I'm not aware of anyone else who's doing particularly what we do on this show.
Yeah, it's a really fun idea.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun doing it. It's more fun than I think I even realized when we started. And I'm sorry, what was your first question?
It was regarding the podcast is audio only, so you don't have all the visuals, which you actually did very well.
Podcast is audio only, but we recently started experimenting with Twitch, so we'll see how we implement that. If we implement that for the dirty inning moving forward, but that's something we're considering.
Because if it's like this, I think it has some real potential. The PowerPoint worked well.
That's honestly, as I was putting that together, I was like, this is kind of a interesting supplemental tool for the kind of storytelling we do. So that might be something to consider moving forward.
Justin, this is Seamus Carney. I have one observation and one question. The observation is that I looked at that hand-drawn map or picture that you showed, and it did not look like there was a ball field anywhere. That semi-curved building that may have been hinted it was a ball field doesn't. I think that's a colliery of some kind.
That's a roundhouse.
Yes, or a roundhouse. Yes, and then secondly, what were your primary sources for discovering the story behind Kelleher, and are the newspapers that you access digitized?
They are, yes. Everything I got was from newspapers on newspapers.com. So if you have like any kind of, I don't know what their premium account is called, but yeah, if you have a paid account through newspapers.com, all that information was in there. I got a few things from books, like I mentioned, Larry Shank's book. There's a book called Even the Browns. That was, I forget what that one's exactly about. It might've been like baseball during wartime or something, but I got some information from that. And then, yeah, in finding the inning itself, I just went back through Kelleher's game logs. And I mean, that one kind of stands out it's pretty fat numbers for that one. Pretty identical.
And lastly, do you ever use retro sheet?
Yeah, occasionally I do. I've honestly, some of the ones we do are so old that there's no particular details about what exactly happened in the game. So you'll get a lot of stuff like unidentified out or unidentified play. But yeah, we've made use of retro sheet in the past.
Thanks.
No problem. Thank you.
Justin, how'd you come up with the name The Dirty Inning, and what is its significance?
Sure. I forget who, it might have been Tom Verducci. It was during a broadcast, gosh, probably like 2015, some baseball broadcast. He mentioned the phrase "the dirty inning" as the opposite of a clean inning when a pitcher comes in and doesn't let the other team score after his team has scored, but a dirty inning is the exact opposite. So that I don't think it's commonly used, and to be honest, I'm a little curious about the formality of its definition in the baseball lexicon, but I jumped on that right away because I liked it so much. To be honest, another name we'd considered was slop ball. And I think that's even less formal of a term. So it was between that and the dirty inning. I was like, all right, let's go with dirty. It sounds a little more, real. Sounds a little more like, if they're using it on a broadcast and it's an actual term. But yeah, that is where I got it from.
I believe it came from the fact that a relief pitcher is supposed to offer relief, but then when he doesn't, it becomes known as a dirty inning. I think there was an article about it in the National Pastime several years ago, as I recall. I wish I could be more pinpoint about it, but that's my understanding.
And Justin, this is Dennis.
Hey, Dennis.
And I wanted to ask you, in terms of identifying subject for the dirty inning, like how do you generally do that? Is it like it's stuff you see in books, or do you go through old box scores? I'm really fascinated in how you come up with the subject matter for your podcast.
Well, like I said, a lot of it this past year has been because Hall of Famers have passed away, but it varies. Like sometimes I'll look at when the date we're going to record, and I'll look at anniversaries, baseball anniversaries that were from that day, and we'll use that as a jumping off point. Like our most recent one was about Ryne Sandberg's last game as manager in Philadelphia, because it was the anniversary of 39 years since he had been traded from the Phillies to the Cubs. So we just used that as a jumping off point to be like, oh, we're going to do a Ryne Sandberg episode. Why not? And then in other cases, like with this one, you just kind of think about like, what's an era we haven't like talked about in a while? What's a year that feels like we haven't ever done? Because you try to avoid overlap, but we've actually done enough of these. We've done enough of these that we repeated one without realizing it. And I didn't know it until somebody who had listened pointed it out. And I think it was because we had done, like, the first time we had focused on the pitcher, and then the second time we had really focused on the situation. And so we just kind of like, with years separating these episodes, didn't put together that we were doing the same thing. But sometimes, you'll mention somebody and be like, oh, we did a dirty inning about him. So I guess it's kind of my fantasy that at the end of the day, you'll be able to put together a whole, like a whole catalog connected universe of Phillies stories if you put all of our episodes in like chronological order. I will never do that, but I'm just saying that is my fantasy that you'll be able to do that. So yeah, sometimes it's just going through a particular season and seeing like what games did they allow the most runs in, and like was there an inning where they gave up like 8, 10, 12 runs, and then that becomes a pretty good candidate. And then other times, yeah, it's because of an anniversary or because someone has passed away that we want to talk about. So it can vary.
Well, Justin, if we have anything hot for you, we'll definitely send it your way.
I appreciate it. Hey, you guys helped me out big time. We did an episode on the first game in Phillies history. If you remember, you got me the name of an umpire that was wrong in a very old newspaper from the 1880s. And that helped a lot. That put the whole episode in motion. So I know you guys do great work.
Yeah, we were happy to do that.
Hey, Justin, you were curious about the 12 runs. According to the Phillies media guide, it's still the record.
It's still the record? All right.
Hey,
go, Hal.
If anybody is interested, Kelleher's major league ERA before that inning was 4.26. after that dirty inning, it was 18.41. No good.
That'll get you on the train to Baltimore with your boss.
We're talking about the most runs in an inning. I vaguely remember, and the group may be able to correct me, back in 52 or 53, I think the Red Sox scored something like 17 runs in an inning against the Tigers to beat them 20-something to whatever.
Yeah, that's correct. I'd have to look up which game that was, though. Anybody else have any questions for Justin?
That Red Sox game, it looks like it was in 1953, because that's what I was trying to find out about the record for an inning. And yeah, the Red Sox scored 17 runs, beat Detroit 23-3. So I guess it was the Patriots versus the Lions, more so than Red Sox and Tigers, but football score. But yeah, it was June 18th, 1953.
And obviously, there's been some close calls with that record. What was it, a couple of years ago? The Mets came to Philly, and Steven Matz didn't even get out of the inning. He surrendered, 8 or 10 runs in the first inning before he got pulled. So he got close.
I'm going to miss Steven. Him going to the Blue Jays is really going to hurt the Phillies offense this year.
It is. It is. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, we can move along to Tom Gilbert if he's still here or is here yet. Justin, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you jumping on for us and doing that live. That was fantastic. And if anybody's interested in the podcast, the link to the podcast is in the chat, so you'll be able to find it. Or you can Google The Dirty Inning, and it's at the Good Fight website.
Thanks so much, guys. Really had a lot of fun.